Welcome, everybody, to today's Safety Roundtable session. We're going to be in my heartland today of talking about slips, trips, and falls. As you may have seen, today marks the fourth day of September, which I call Sliptember. So every September, I do a bit of a campaign to raise awareness on the importance of slips, trips, and falls, specifically slips, because that's really what I focus in on. And we do lots and lots of content. So you'll see a lot of posts on LinkedIn and other places. And we're going to be focusing the safety roundtable this month, as well as the podcast this month on slip safety. So a really focused effort to raise awareness, talk about some of the things, the strategies that we can do to prevent these kinds of accidents, and just get people thinking a bit more about it, really. So I'm delighted to see lots of you joining today. It wasn't well promoted, this event, because we had planned to do a different session today, but we couldn't make it work. So here we are, but we've pulled in something out of the hat. And I'm delighted to be joined by one, perhaps two, colleagues from overseas to try and give a bit of a global perspective on this topic. Marcel Engels is joining me. Marcel, would you like to just introduce yourself, and then hopefully Richard Bowman may well be joining us at some point as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm very happy to be here to contribute what I can. Just so my background is I'm working in a materials research institute based on ceramics and glass. And that's our connection with the slip resistance problem is that we've been focusing on testing slip resistance as a product characteristic. Which means that we have a dual approach. On the one side, we do slip measurements, and we look at the situation of slip in certain occasions on site. And on the other hand, we try to derive from that ways to improve surfaces to generate durable, long-lasting slip resistance and safe applications of surface types. So that's a bit our background that we bring into this discussion.
Thanks, Marcel. And you're a fellow member of the UK Slip Resistance Group, which is the sort of trade body, I suppose, in the UK. Are there similar groups like that around the world?
Yeah, there are some groups in Spain, which of course the main difference between the groups is that their focus is on different kind of measuring methods. If you have Spain and as well as England, UK, that we have to focus on the use of the pendulum as the main measuring method for estimating risk potential. Slip risk potential. If you go into Germany, we also have expert groups there, which are mainly focusing on the different kind of measurements like the GMG measurements, the tribometer measurements, as well as the product classification method, which we use in the laboratory, which is the RAM method. So, and that's always so we are participating in different kind of groups because there's of course, always a good part to learn from the discussion between the different measuring methods and trying to find a common basis because from our point of view, and this is the important one, I think, is we are, maybe just to highlight that, the main thing that we contribute in the discussion, which has now also been taken up by Spain, who've done a lot of work there, very good work there, is look in the surface structure and to find out exactly what it means for slip resistance, because the surface structure is a given and a slip measurement is always an interpretation of that structure. So and there are different interpretations depending on what kind of measuring method you use. So that's what we've been focusing on to try to find out exactly what to expect and how to translate and how to look at the different approaches.
Yeah, no, perfect. That's really good context. And I talk about the 6 causes of slips, which I bundle up into an acronym of CHIMES, and S is the surface. And I always say that's kind of the most important one because you can do everything else right, but if you've got the wrong surface floor there, then it's going to be very, very difficult to keep the environment safe and prevent people from slipping. Just as a bit of context, Marcel, here in the UK, slips, trips, and falls is the biggest cause of accident, RIDDOR, which is kind of reportable injury. Slips is the biggest cause of insurance claim, biggest
Mhm.
cause of A&E admission. Costs sort of over £1.5 billion of insurance claims each year just
Mhm.
on slips, and trips are on top.
Yeah.
And we've seen six-figure criminal fines for people slipping in supermarkets, for example. Um,
Mm.
what's the picture where you are? Is it similar, the data?
Yeah, if I look at the situation in Holland and Germany, especially where we are working, I think the situation is the same. We see a lot of claims and also a lot of insurance funding going into this kind of accidents. I
Mm.
think the number of accidents is, although there is always a discussion exactly where to distinguish between slips and trips and real
Yeah,
falls to find out exactly what we are looking at. So that's
yeah,
always a big discussion. I think that Richard Bowman did a lot of research on that and presented that also to highlight the difficulty.
yeah.
But I think that the main difference that we see there is that what is just a small part is there is, of course, this kind of work going on, trying to specify, trying to look at the background of the slips and trips, but we have a different kind of a legal structure when it comes to claims and how the claims are rewarded, etc. So it's not like, for instance, the American culture where you can where the claims are significantly higher than we have in
Mm.
Germany or in Holland. But it's one of the most important issues when regarding in accidents in the working situation as well, also in the public situation,
Yeah,
public areas. So that's the same. I think that's anywhere. That's always the same. The only thing that we always use is that when we see these kind of figures, is that this example of when you have one people falling in a certain spot, there are at least 50 or maybe even more which have fallen but attributed it to their own way of walking or behaving and do not
mm.
come forward with a claim. So it's always the tip of the iceberg. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely agree with you there. And the data, I'm going to be speaking at the end of this about my book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, and I did a bit of
Mhm.
digging on data, and the data in the US all around accidents
Mhm.
is in line with the UK. So
Mhm.
if you look at the population of the UK and the number of accidents, and you look at the population comparatively in the US, and the number of accidents are very similar. As you say, the legal system there is very different, so the costs are higher in the
Mhm.
US, partly because they have no fault kind of um, employer, employee claims. So if you make a claim,
Mhm.
in many states you just get paid out
Mhm.
instantly, rather than in the UK where these things can be defended. And partly because obviously the court system is quite friendly, should we say, to claimants in the US versus other places. I've
Yeah.
spoken with on my podcast before people from Ireland. This picture is very consistent
Mhm.
around the world.
Yeah.
So you spoke a bit about some of the differences in standards. Let's just dig into that a little bit, because obviously that is your key area. If people are joining us from the UK, they'll be familiar, hopefully, with the pendulum test, because that's kind of
Yep.
what the HSE stipulates is the best way
Mhm.
um, of measuring slip resistance here in the UK. But you mentioned a couple of
Mhm.
other different tests. Perhaps you could just speak to, how these tests kind of work at a high level that's maybe different to the pendulum, so people could sort of picture the different types of
Yeah.
testing that is available.
Yeah, if you look at the mechanisms we're using for different kind of testing is, of course, if you have your pendulum, you have a high speed of the impact. It's slides over the surface with a certain speed. You have a high, they call it a high hardness rubber, which you have a you have a lower hardness rubber for the barefoot situation, a high hardness rubber for the normal foot shoe situations. Um, so it's quite a different approach. It's coming for all in Germany. I know it's mainly based on exactly what we've been doing for they call it the traffic area, where it's supposed to simulate the braking behavior of a car at a certain speed, which meant there were different rubbers in use for the sliders. But it's a different way of gliding with a braking mechanism than, for instance, with a tribometer. Tribometer is just going a certain constant speed, dragging the slider across the surface. One of the problems there is that, for instance, that the slider is quite hard. So it has anyway its usability, its applicability for normal areas where people walk. For barefoot areas, it's a bit difficult. And if you look at the ramp, of course, is a laboratory method. And if you look at the mechanisms of walking on the ramp and slipping on the ramp, it's a combination of a static component, of a dynamic component, of the speed up of sliding, which causes the falling and such. So it's three different kind of elements from the slipping without covering the whole of the slipping. If you have a dynamic coefficient like you do with a tribometer, that's just a small part of actual slipping. The pendulum is the braking part, is only a small part, and the ramp, of course, has a different part of the slipping mechanism. But then, of course, you have to also take into account the way that the people are walking. You have to specify that exactly. So it's one of the things that is always difficult to talk about is that we see differences in the measuring methods. That's a discussion that we, for our part, are looking in very, very deeply. What, of course, makes it more difficult to use the standards is that we see correlations of the measuring methods. And again, there, depending on the surface quality, if you have a certain surface with a certain roughness, all the three methods apply and can be correlated. But there are areas where one or the other method doesn't function as well as the other, and you get differences. So you always have to be very keen on which kind of surface you are using your method. Of course, that's a discussion, as everybody knows, in the back of his head, because it's also a thing that is, of course, also combined with the effects of durability and the way that the different methods go specify these kind of effects. But I think for the moment, what we now have is a standard where we have the three methods alongside of each other, because, of course, different countries have different experiences, and nobody's going to throw away experience and focus on the other method just because it's been put forward as the most excellent method. Every method has its merits and its drawbacks, and that's the way that we are working with it now at the moment. I think that the standard was been put forward to combining the three methods. We have been talking years. I've been in standardization since 1990, and we have been talking about a one slip measurement method, which one of the colleagues from the standardization committee told me, one slip measurement method, it's no dream, it's a bloody nightmare. So you won't get there in the end, because everybody has this experience with its own method. And I said it's all had this. They're not doing something wrong. They're just doing something different.
Differently,
and
exactly.
you need to know what the differences are. And maybe I think it's still an ongoing process where we try to optimize the measuring method. If you see the new standard, the DIN, the EN 16165, which incorporates a lot of things we have learned over the years regarding reference surfaces, the way of walking, how you should treat your material, how you should treat and look at, for instance, your validation surfaces that you can use to check yourself. But it's progressing. It's still progressing. I think that we have not reached yet the end of that, and the work is still ongoing. Of course, there have been lots of experience, but getting the people together and talking about an approach or a comparison of the approaches is always a difficult thing. And I think we're learning to do that at the moment. And I think that's why I always am very keen to listen to also what Richard Bowman has to say, because he's always very focused on exactly what the drawbacks and the benefits are, the measuring methods. And he has a very keen view on exactly where we should be going and how to use it. In some cases, and I have to speak for myself.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's allowed, sometimes it's not allowed. But in some cases, we use more methods. Some
Mhm.
cases, I use the pendulum and the floor cycle or the GMG, the turbometer on site, because the difference between the two methods says me more about what actually is going on site than just using one of the measurement methods. But of course, that's our approach. That's not something that's been standardized because that's very difficult to get into a
Yeah.
large forum.
Yeah. 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 Good stuff. So yeah, so there's some definitely differences internationally regarding standards and testing methods and all of this kind of stuff. So for anybody in the audience, if you're dealing with an international business, then it's important to understand, you know, just like the laws and health and safety regulations
Mm,
generally going to be different
yeah.
in different jurisdictions. When it comes
Mhm.
to slip resistance, you're going to have different
Yeah.
standards in different jurisdictions, different countries as well. So it's
Mhm.
important to bear that in mind for sure.
Yeah.
So that's one of the challenges. What would be some of the other challenges from a maybe a more sort of practical sense in terms of like obstacles or misconceptions or misunderstandings that you've seen
Mhm.
people struggling with in your experience, Marcel?
Yeah, I think one of the more important thing is that if slip resistance is a complaint and we go on site, is that of course we see people going around using the machines, putting them on site, and generating a number and telling this is good or it's not good. But you always have to look at the system. You
Yeah,
always have to look at the complete system. You have to look at the way that the surface is perceived. You have to look at the signs that are on place. You have to look at the way it is cleaned, it's maintained. You have to look also that if the tile which has been chosen or the flooring which has been chosen is in the beginning adequate for the area. I
mm,
know that some people from the ceramic side say there's not a wrong tile, there's only a wrong tile for a wrong application. uh, so it's always a bit it's a bit difficult to specify exactly where the main causes are. But I think in many cases, cleaning and maintenance is a problem.
mm,
If you have a slip resistant floor, it doesn't mean that it doesn't need any care because it stays slip resistant forever. No, you have to clean it and to maintain it to keep it that way. And that's of course that's an aspect which not only addresses the way that the beginning of the installation is, but also on a long-term basis has to be approached. Like you're looking at the moment also in a lot of the aspects of the wear of a surface and exactly what we might expect from the wear of a surface. Because the difficult there is that we can measure worn surfaces and look at the decrease. But it's always difficult to get a grip on exactly how they are generated. There isn't research going on in Spain where they are looking at counting the number of or the frequency of people walking on it to get a grip on an idea of how fast a slip resistance can decrease. But it's also depending on the surface itself,
mm,
the wearability of the surface and the way it fits with the shoe or with the foot. So
yeah,
it's very complex, but just the complexity is something that needs to be taken into consideration if you are on site. Uh,
yeah,
you can
yeah,
there is no one solution which you can use everywhere. You have to always look at the complete system,
mm,
which is very important. The measurement of the slip resistance is just one part, but you always have to check before and after cleaning. Look at the
yeah,
surface. Is it worn? Is it not worn? Because yeah, I think that's something that's somebody at we have this conference, the Slip Trips and Fall conference, where we also regularly participate, and there have been people showing and highlighting that people can also walk on ice because they expect that it's
yeah,
slippery, so they can
yeah,
adjust the walking.
yeah,
If you do not expect it to be slippery, that's the problem. And that's, for instance, what we see in swimming pools, where you have, let's say, cleaners with some parts of you call it like lubricants in it.
mhm,
If they stay on the floor and dry on the floor, you get a very rough surface, a very surface which is sticky and dry, and which has absolutely no slip resistance and wet. And that's where the people, if they don't expect it, that's where the people are going to be
yeah,
falling. So these are all aspects we have to take into account when going on
yeah,
site. Mm.
yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting you've highlighted some of these points because I speak about what I call the slip problem, and slip being an acronym for people perceiving slips as S simple, L low cost, I impossible to prevent, P paltry, in other words, insignificant.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that to focus in on that first piece, there's this perception
Mm.
that, oh, it's simple, just do this, just do that. As long as you've got the
Mhm.
right floor, it's fine. Or as long as you do this, it's
Yeah.
fine. And as you say, it's kind of about this whole system and this kind of holistic view. And I think the biggest challenge that I see is that people have this perception that it's simple. And so they
Mm.
kind of put a simple amount of effort into it. And what we can see from the data, which we've spoken about all around the world, is that that's what we're getting from this
Yeah.
kind of simple or I would say superficial
Mm.
approach. And actually, to
Yeah.
drive the data down and to make improvements, we need to, as you
Mm.
say, go into a lot more detail.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a long-term approach that you have to take. Sometimes it's just
Mm,
something. It's not always a thing that you do just one time and then it's done. But sometimes it means that you have to do things regularly to keep it that way.
yeah.
And sometimes the solutions are not quite as how do you say? I'm looking for the right English words there. It's not something that you see directly or you would expect directly. Sometimes
Yeah.
we had all a presentation area where there was an inclination which was polished. People were falling, and we discovered that the slip resistance was, well, it was not quite safe,
Hmm.
but we advised them because people were going with their beverages into that area and sitting down and drinking their beverages. And we said the first thing you have to do is to keep the beverages out of that room
Yeah.
because that's the slip risk. If people are going to spill their drinks, then that's where they're going to fall. If there's no spilling on the floor, then people won't slip. Then it's sufficient. But it's you always have to look at the complete, let's say, aspects that you can do. In that case, it
Mm,
was lighting, it was a grip, it was keeping the beverages from a certain room. There are all different kinds of possibilities to enhance your slip reduction. Mm.
yeah. Yeah. To what extent do you feel that there is a sort of personal responsibility or a kind of cultural issue? In other words, uh, it's down that person should take more care. We need to improve our safety culture. Or to what extent is it more around that systematic, physical control approach? Which sort of side of that coin do you perceive is kind of more important?
Well, that's the institutional answer. It depends on the circumstances.
Mm,
Because if you have a controlled circumstance, like you have in a working area where you can control the shoes and the way that people behave and what they should be looking at and signage and stuff, then of course you have more control on the situation. But in the case where you do not have that control, your requirements, maybe if you have the same way of contamination or slip floor, you need to do something else. You have to look at the people that are walking on it. If we do a slip resistance testing and we have somebody who falls on the floor and somebody who doesn't fall on the floor on our ramp, for instance, we always have to go with the people who fall because they are the
mm,
ones that slip on this kind of floor. The other ones, no problem. So
yeah,
sometimes if you do barefoot testing, you get a large difference between your different testers because sometimes the structure of the surface aligns with the foot structure, and we have people, they have what we call a mountain goat syndrome. You can tilt your ramp until it's almost like 90 degrees and they still are standing there. And they
yeah,
have people which just by the smallest inclination start to slip. But these
mm,
are the people that are going to fall. So
yeah,
then you have to look at this kind of approach. But yeah, it depends indeed on the public that you're or the users that you're going for.
mm,
Um, and what we always say, if you see something happening, in most cases, when something happens and we get called to look at the claim, if one person falls and claims about it, there are a lot of people who have been falling, but didn't realize that they could claim on that because they see themselves as responsible or the way they are
yeah,
walking or other
mm,
fractures. Mm.
or
I
they've,
don't know if that answers your question. So
yeah, no, it does. Yeah, yeah. All those people have maybe slipped and fallen, but just haven't hurt themselves, and therefore they haven't
yeah,
taken it any further because that happens a lot. You know,
yeah.
people will slip or trip, sort
Mm,
of feel a bit embarrassed, dust themselves off,
mm.
crack
Yep,
on,
yep,
and then
yep,
nothing ever comes of it. They don't report it, and therefore you don't know it's happened even a lot of
yep,
the time.
yep.
So it is quite difficult. If anybody's got any questions for Marcel or I, please feel free to, if you're on Zoom, go to reactions, raise your hand, and we'll call you up to speak. Or if you're
Mm,
watching along with us, pop a question in the comments, and we'd be happy to pick up on those. I wanted Marcel to talk about a couple of, I suppose, drivers, sort of more macro drivers to this challenging area. And there's particular ones I was keen to think about were demographics. So the fact that
mhm,
we've got, certainly in the Western world, an aging population, and that means that
mhm,
people are more active later in life. They're working at an older age. They're also sort of doing leisure activities at an older age.
mhm,
But obviously, the older you are, the more likely you are to fall, and you're also more
mhm,
likely to hurt yourself more seriously. So that was
mhm,
one. Another one was around the economy. So, um, inflation's obviously been quite difficult for the last few years, but healthcare cost inflation
yeah,
is typically much greater than normal inflation. So the cost of dealing with these issues is quite big.
yeah.
And then interested on your view about climate change. There's certainly some the Met Office here in the UK are talking about we're going to be getting more and more rain, and that's obviously going to contribute. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on those three kind of areas?
Yeah, I think it is, especially if you look at the influencing factors, like you said, the climate change and economic change is the climate change is, of course, when you're in a Nordic country, like I'm from Netherlands, we always expect rain. We call ourselves the land of
Yeah.
the frogs, so so we always have rain. So that puts another aspect on how to deal with slip resistance, of course. Then when you look in what has been happening in Italy and in Spain, but of course, if it changes, you have to adapt to it, and you have to look at your requirements. So I think also the requirement system will have to be adapted to what's going to be there. Um, if you look at the demographic, that's something that I have seen in Holland, especially in areas where demography changes. It's an important aspect of how you look at slip resistance. Um, they do not put only a limit for minimal slip resistance, but also for maximum slip resistance.
Hmm.
If you have people with a rollator, or do you call it like walking aid,
Yeah.
uh, if these people have a very slow pace, they tend to, if the slip resistance is too high, they tend to stick with their feet, or
Mm.
they trip, and then they fall.
Yeah.
Of course, that's also a cause for accidents and for injuries. Um, of course, normally, if you slip and you slip backwards, that of course, because your reflexes are not that quick anymore, that's more severe when you look at the injury. But it's still an area of where people injure themselves. So for especially if you look at where they treat not in the public area, but mainly there where elderly people are being treated or being taken care of. In that case, there's also a limit for the maximum slip resistance, not just
Mm.
to prevent the slipping. Mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that as well as the yeah, of course, that puts a lot of emphasis, of course, also especially because we see that, especially if you take into the care and the people in the institutes who take care of the people, the
Yeah.
elderly people. The costs are rising. The personal possibilities and capabilities are decreasing. So it puts a lot of pressure on this issue. Mm.
Mm. Yeah. Got a question here in the chat for you, Marcel,
Yeah.
about surface, because you mentioned your looking specifically at kind of surface
Mm.
profiles and surface structures and
Yeah.
so on. Um,
Yeah.
what um, what developments or technologies are there around floor types that might mean that slip resistance and slip problems are decreased over the coming years? Is there anything going on in the technology world?
Yeah, I think that it depends a bit. That's something that, if you talk about economic influences, that's something that we see in the industries. Of course, the pressure on the industry is very high, but still, there's a lot of action going on in trying to find surface solutions with a longer durability of slip
Mm.
resistant functionality.
Yeah.
And I know that in some cases we have been developing durable slip resistant surfaces where you have to look at exactly how the structure is, what part of the structure is being decreased by wear, and how you can prevent that. It's a very complex matter, and that's a bit what makes it difficult to get it into the market. To
Mm.
say it like this,
Yeah.
because it's not just one parameter solution. You have to look at the surface that's been described by different kind of parameters, depends on how you measure it,
Hmm.
and from that you have to derive what your surface can do. And every
Yeah.
surface is also, again, then depending on its material composition and how it will abrade and how it will generate the slip resistance and keep the slip resistance. So it's a difficult one, but when we started working on that, everybody said, well, the surface structure, the influence of slip resistance is way too difficult. You're never going to get to on the point where you can say something about it. Well, I think at the moment we have reached that point, but we have also learned that every surface has its own specific yeah, behavior
Hmm.
regarding slip resistance and wear. But we
Yeah.
now have the tools to quantify it and to shift surfaces in a direction that they can enhance their durability. So
Yeah.
uh, we have been the new methods that we have. It's mostly an optical measurement, because an optical measurement addresses more the rough structure of the surfaces for
Yeah.
use for slip resistance. If you do a tactile measurement, you can use it for a quick check, but the problem there is it doesn't address all the aspects that are important.
Hmm.
But if you do that nowadays, the new tools that we're using, they can also generate CAD data, which can be used by people making dies or making presses for surface structures to help them to generate the surfaces which can function permanently in a good way.
Mm. Mm.
So well, it's there's a lot going on there, but I think that the problem there still is when you start this kind of developments, you in the end want to have a machine which you put on the floor, which recognizes the floor and tells you on the green light it's okay, it's
Yeah.
long term okay, or the red light it's not okay, and that's still a way to go. That's still a way
Yeah.
to go. So, but
Yeah.
you have to start the work somewhere. You get over this threshold of large research projects to get somewhere to a point where have a simple approach or machine or something which tells you good and not good on long
Mm.
term.
Yeah.
So that's I think that's something that for also for slip resistance that artificial intelligence might support
Mm.
and bring together these kind of aspects and help somebody to evaluate the floor based on
Yeah.
its structure.
Hmm.
That's what we're working at the moment, but it's like I said, um, if you're using artificial intelligence, the sky is the limit. But on the other hand, nobody can tell you where to get there, so
Yeah.
it's difficult.
Mm.
It's the potential which is put forward doesn't always align with the possibilities that you see when you use it in practice. Mm.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I think one of the things that would most shock people is the speed at which the slip resistance of a floor can change.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
and there are different factors at play here. So, you know,
Yeah.
you could install a brand new floor, which is excellent slip
Hmm.
resistance on whatever test you were to choose.
Hmm.
And if you did something to it by, as you said earlier, using a cleaning product that was improper and left behind a residue, that floor surface could
Hmm.
become pretty slippery very, very quickly through
Yeah.
ineffective maintenance. So that's one
Hmm.
side. Um, but the other side around the kind of wear and tear and the use, I mean, have you got any sort of examples of, time frames or sort of use, footfall usages where the slip resistance of a floor, which kind of could be chosen on the basis of it's a slip resistant floor and it looks like it should be a slip resistant floor, but actually within a certain period of time that can change inherently within the floor. Have you got any examples of that?
Well, I think the problem there is that there is not a real testing for the durability. If you do the
Mm,
durability testing, like on the most floors, you do a visual testing of how its appearance is going to change. But a functional testing is not a real part of this kind of tests. That's something where we have been looking at for the last year to see what we can do there. Because for us, it's important. So if you look at a hard floor, you do not want to know how it. You do want to know, of course, how it visually changes if you use
yeah.
abrasion, but you always want to know what the slip resistance or the cleanability of the floor is going to change, because these are
Mm,
important aspects which define how much and how you have to clean it, and if you might expect that it's going to be slippery or not. Normally, for if you have a hard floor, these changes can occur quite quickly, but
yeah.
depending on the surface structure, do not always have to incur or lead to a problem. In some cases, you might lose 5% of your slip resistance, which is within a certain area. There are also the safety margins where you can use, as a developer or floor can use. In some cases, there is a larger decrease, sometimes even unexpected decrease, which in any cases can lead to a slip resistance problem. If you have a highly profiled surface, which means that if you have, how do you call it, displacement volume for your contaminants, and you have a high structure which should provide a grip. If this grip is provided with very coarse surface aspects, these surface aspects are experience a lot of pressure while walking on
Mm,
them, and
yeah.
they are the ones to abrade very quickly. And sometimes just going from a steep protrusion to a bit of rounded protrusion causes a direct loss of 30% of slip resistance, which can be
Yeah.
just surpassing the required level of slip
Mm,
on site. So that's a problem. But the thing that we are working on there is that we see that also that's also what the people who manufacture floorings there are looking at is you can adjust your material to make it more resistant.
mm,
You can provide, let's say, correction mechanisms. If you have a surface which large parts in it which provide a slip resistance, and you know that your surface is going to wear, you put some of this material some bit deeper in the layer. So if you
yeah.
abrade it, there is new material which has the same roughness coming up in wear. So you get this self healing surfaces, like as to call it. And I think that's something that we see in some of the developments. But in general, you might say that if you look at hard surfaces, there will be a decrease in slip resistance, but it doesn't always have to be a problem. That's something that you have
Yeah.
to measure. But we're still lacking the simulation method. There are methods which have been used in Australia and are also been tested. For instance, like where you abrade a certain number of cycles and look exactly what your
Yeah,
slip
like
resistance does.
accelerated wear tests. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a way to go about. Well, discussion there, of course, is that that's also a worst case testing. Does it apply for all surfaces, because it's a
Yeah.
very high abrasive working? But it's that's the problem there, is that the wear simulation is still missing. Mhm. And there are surfaces which improve. If you
Mhm.
have a
Yeah.
surface which has a certain roughness, but a very low roughness, and it flattens out a bit, but it's, for instance, a resin surface,
Mm,
then the sticking effect and the let's say the displacement effect can have an effect that the shoe sticks to your
yeah.
surface, which increases your. So it's there, like say, the problem there is that it's very difficult to say something general about floorings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every type of flooring has its own life cycle and its own life cycle changes. So
Mm,
it that keeps us busy. But uh, say, well, we know at the moment how to look at the surface and try to find out exactly how it behaves. There
mhm.
are some aspects also looking into how can we get to a good simulation of a
Yeah.
surface, and it helps us a bit of to understand better what we might expect of a surface. But it's still a learning curve which we have to go through in some cases. But for if you are on site, um, the things that we do for the moment is look at the surface where the loading of the floor is not heavy. We look at an area where there's a lot of walking going on, for instance. We look at the differences, and that helps us to evaluate from that circumstance what can be done, or what can be
Yeah.
done with the surface. Is it like it should be, or is there something which has gone wrong with cleaning? So it's still Yeah, the problem is that slip is, as you said, not simple. It's a complex system, and you
Mm.
always have to take a fresh approach to what you're seeing on site. So it's also difficult to specify a common procedure to go about. There are so many aspects you have to take into account.
Mm.
So yeah, that's it's a complex issue. But
Yeah.
like I said before, we're learning more, and we know now, especially that these wear effects play a role. I think that Richard would, I think, also confirm that durability and long-term slip resistance is a very hot issue discussed at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Just for a bit of context, everybody, in my experience, and I've been doing this for a dozen or more years now, um, I can't tell you the exact figure, but I know the rough figures here. Of every floor that my team and I have ever slip tested, when the floor's been wet, this is not when it's dry. Um, Roughly about 20 to 25% of floors have achieved a low slip potential as we found them.
mhm,
And then of the remaining floors, it's been roughly 50-50 between those
mhm.
floors that actually, if they were cleaned effectively, would achieve a low slip
Yeah,
potential even when they were wet.
yeah,
Uh, or the remainder are floors that, even when you clean them, within an inch of their lives, however you clean them, etc., it's just a slippery floor that is not going to
mhm,
achieve a low slip potential when it's wet. So that gives you an idea of the sort of breakdown of floors. And then obviously
yeah,
the question is on that third part, some of those floors are just old and they've worn away, etc. Some of them
yeah,
potentially are incorrectly specified. Some of them may be perceived as being slip resistant and perhaps they're quite new. But as you said,
mhm,
Marcel, they may well have worn away in a
yeah,
relatively
yeah,
short amount of time. And like you said at the start here, um, this is one of the biggest problems because if people perceive a floor as being slip resistant because of the way that it looks,
mm,
but it isn't, then that is often where accidents happen.
yeah,
So
yeah,
hopefully that sort of that those data points will be useful for people.
mhm,
I just wanted
yeah,
to say as we start to wrap up, um, if you're interested in this topic of slip resistance and slip safety and preventing slip accidents, I'm actually launching my book on this topic on the
mhm,
18th of September. So I've aligned this with Sliptember this year. It's called Prevent Slip Accidents with Slipology. And on the 18th of September at 12:30 on the next safety roundtable, I'm going to be doing a book launch. So come along and I will talk to you a bit about the book. Perhaps I'll read a couple of excerpts, maybe share some of the data and some of the stories from the book as well. If you're interested to learn a bit more about the book, there is a website available with a waiting list, and you can, if you register, sort of pre-register your interest, you can get the first 5 chapters sent to you in advance as well. So to whet your appetite for the 18th. The website for that is scorecard.slipsafety.co.uk/book. So that's how you can get hold of the book. Um, Before we wrap up, then Marcel, and I appreciate you
mhm.
having joined today, and I'll have to give Richard an elbow to see what's happened to him. Although it is almost 11 o'clock at night in Australia. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we haven't touched on yet? And also, what would be the best way if anybody wants to kind of get in touch with you of doing that?
Well, the best way to get in touch with you is to contact me directly because I'm responsible for slip resistance testing here in the FGK, institute. And if you are in the neighborhood, you're very welcome to visit us and look at what we are doing. We're always looking for interaction with people from the area, people from this kind of specific topics, because that's something I think is very important if you are busy in slip resistance, is don't close yourself and keep yourself to the knowledge that you think you have. We all, with every claim that we do, with everything that we do, we always learn new stuff,
Yeah,
different surfaces, different aspects. Every time we are on site, something new sticks. So we keep on learning. this is an area where you keep on learning constantly.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is there that we know that it's a complex system. You have to look at a lot of aspects to be sure what you're telling the people about the slip risk that they have. And the other thing is that you keep an open mind, open vision, and take up everything you can learn in this kind of like this meeting. This is something that, every meeting that we have, every symposium that we have, every discussion that we have with the experts, we have to have slips flash sessions and international conferences, and we never go away from that without learning anything. So we always take up something new. It's ongoing development.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thanks, Jason, who's put in the chat. Thanks for the information. It'll certainly assist me as a safety professional in identifying potentials for and means in which to prevent slips. So that's good to hear, Jason. We're glad that today has been helpful. Well, thank you, Marcel. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Do get involved in Sliptember. Get involved on social media and join us in a couple of weeks as we launch the book. And keep in touch and let's keep stopping slips. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Pleasure to be here.